A big focus for Governor Charlie Baker as he settles into office is education, and he used his inaugural address to send a clear message about his plans to act on that issue.
And while traditional public schools will always be the backbone of our education system, we need more high-performing public charter schools, especially in underperforming school districts, to complement them.
Charter schools have long been at the heart of a passionate debate over how to best improve public education. As part of our focus series on charting the next course for Massachusetts, WGBH reporter Stephanie Leiden looks at charter schools.
One of the first things you notice about the kids at the Brook Mattapan Charter School is the uniform. Khaki slacks and a navy polo shirt on everyone from the youngest students bouncing to Taylor Swift right up to 8th graders.
So then what do we do with these numbers?
Teachers here are meeting with students. Individualized attention is one of the school's hallmarks. So is a strict behavior code. It's quiet enough to hear a page turn. When Brook Mattapan opened 3 years ago, a third of these kids were reading below grade level. Last year, their MCAS scores in English language arts were the highest in the state, better than those from wealthy suburban schools. And Brook Mattapan is located in one of the city's poorest neighborhoods. Nearly all the students here are either Black or Latino.
The achievement gap can be closed, and we're showing that every year.
Katie Megrian is the principal. She says expectations are a big part of its success, so is the freedom to make decisions. While charter schools are public, most operate independently from public school boards. At Brook Mattapan, the school year and the school day are both longer. Teachers are non-union.
It allows me to choose who I'm picking as teachers and who I'm retaining as teachers.
Megrian would like to see Brook Mattapan expand to include a high school, but the state caps or limits the number of charter schools. Administrators here support Governor Baker's call to lift that cap.
When we have schools like this one or other high-performing charter and district schools where Black and Latino kids are fulfilling their potential and performing at the level that we know they can, we ought to be figuring out how to do more of that.
Brook Mattapan founder John Clark says charter schools fill a critical need, but critics say they drain limited resources from traditional schools.
How's it going?
Haitian Barentz Waramuni has 2 children in the Boston Public Schools and is a member of the citywide Parents Council. He points out that when kids leave district schools for charters, funding goes with them. But the cost of running the schools they leave behind remains the same.
It becomes this vicious circle where you have lower enrollments that lead to less teachers available, that lead to less programs, which leads to a worse school climate, which then leads to lower enrollments. And it just keeps going down and down and down, and you decimate a school.
District schools have to take everyone, but Haitian says he sees evidence that charter schools weed out students unable to adhere to disciplinary and academic standards.
They achieve, it seems, really high test scores by letting go of all of the kids that don't quite test well.
Both sides in the charter school debate point to studies that bolster and refute that charge.
Good. He looks great.
At Brook Mattapan, administrators say some students do leave in the 6th and 7th grades, but only to get a jump on admissions to prestigious high schools.
Why is that adaptation important? How does that help them?
So will more charters improve public education or deprive resources from existing schools? The answer may lie somewhere between true or false.
And both sides of this debate really frame it as a social justice issue. The charter school folks talk about the achievement gap, and they say that something needs to be done to allow poor, often minority students to enable access the same kind of education as their wealthy peers. On the other side, you have the folks who are against charter schools who say it really creates a two-tiered system, that it's a competition. And by nature of a competition, you're going to have winners and losers.
We hear a lot about wait lists when we're talking about charter schools. Is there a wait list at the school that you visited?
There is. Actually, there are 3 of these Brook schools. They're named for Senator Edward Brooke. There's one in East Boston as well, and in Roslindale. Combined among the 3 schools, administrators say the wait list is about 4,000 kids.
4,000.
You hear about these long wait lists. It's controversial as well. The state auditor released a report last December, and she found that the way the data is collected might be imperfect. perfect, that there may be duplicate names on some of these wait lists and that there's a rollover. But you ask folks at these, at the chart, they do it by lottery, and these lotteries people turn out, and there are always far more families than slots.
Tell me a little bit more about the way the state's charter school cap works.
So in most communities, districts can spend 9% of their total budget on charter schools. In lower performing districts, and Boston is one of them, that can be doubled to 18%. So there's that limit in it, and if the charters are full, then what they want to do at Brook Mattapan expand, they cannot. Governor Baker may have an uphill battle. The legislature looked at this issue. There was a bill to lift the cap, and it failed this summer.
Stephanie Lyden, thank you.
You're welcome.
So why are charter schools so controversial if, as supporters say, they're critical to reforming public education? I'm joined now by Paul Reville, the former Massachusetts Secretary of Education and a charter school proponent. Paul, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Adam. Good to be here.
Let's start by talking about Governor Baker's drive to increase the number of charter schools in the state. You both welcome this push on the governor's part and are a little concerned about it. Why is that?
Well, on the welcoming side, I think where we have high-performing schools like the one we've just witnessed, shame on us if we don't do everything in our power to make that opportunity more available to as many children, particularly children in need, as possible. So I'm in favor of expanding the number of seats. At the same time, we're now 22 years into education reform from 1993. We still have less than 4% of our children in charter schools. So for the foreseeable future, the overwhelming majority of our children are going to be in mainstream schools. And I worry a little bit that if we re-argue this battle we've had about charter schools, we're going to consume a lot of the energy, a lot of the oxygen that ought to be going into this concern about the achievement gap overall and what strategies we're going to use in education more generally, from preschool through higher education, to close achievement gaps.
It is worth noting, I think, that the Patrick administration expanded the role that charter schools play, right?
Yes, we passed the most meaningful charter school cap lift in the history of the Commonwealth. It's made a big difference. It's not enough in some places. They've hit that limit already, and we need more room. And so, as I say, I'm in favor of the strongest schools expanding and making more seats available. But it would be a shame if the next few years are characterized by another battle royale over charter schools, utilizing arguments that we've had for years, time and time again.
Screenings of Waiting for Superman followed by debates, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. And we need to deal with it. We need to address the issue. And at the same time, there are so many other issues that need to be addressed that I don't want to see us get sidetracked.
Let's talk about some of those. Governor Baker clearly is concerned, I think, about equality of educational opportunity and equalizing outcomes. He talked about charters as a way to do that in his inaugural. He also talked about Lawrence and the way students there have benefited from state receivership. But you didn't hear him talk about early childhood education. And you, I know, believe that is crucial. Why is early childhood education so important, do you think?
Well, I mean, all the research suggests, and we've got research in neuroscience, we've got educational research, we've got child development research that suggests that for every dollar we spend in early childhood education, the return is somewhere between 5 and 7 times over a child's lifetime. So if you're making a pure business argument in terms of return on investment on education dollars spent, there's no better place to spend that money than in early childhood. When I was Secretary of Education, I would routinely go into schools and find some children who had 1/3 the vocabulary of the person sitting next to them in kindergarten, and those kids basically would stay in that position throughout their entire time, throughout their 13 years in K-12 schools.
So, incredible deficit.
Yeah, it's a big deficit, and unless we do something to remedy it before school starts, we have no hope of achieving the kind of parity that we're aiming for.
How much would expanding that in a meaningful way cost? Because obviously these are tough fiscal times. We've got this budget gap that the Patrick administration wrapped up with. Now Governor Baker's grappling with it. And he has said he doesn't want to raise taxes, that people are paying enough in taxes already. So can we find the money to expand early childhood ed, do you think?
Well, there's a big challenge, and the budget is one of the biggest challenges facing the new administration because they, no doubt will have a lot of good ideas about things that we need to do in education. And not everything that we do in education by way of change and improvement has to cost money, but some things, like resolving these wait lists for poor kids who want access to quality early childhood education, will cost some money. Now, we've just received, our Department of Early Education and Care has just received a major major federal grant to do this work and do it out in the gateway cities. As I circulate around the philanthropic community, I find a tremendous amount of interest in early childhood education and in the business community. So I think if we're creative, we can find some ways to both reduce the size of the waiting list and increase the quality of programs. But it's got to be a priority, and that's important.
What else would you like to see Governor Baker pursue in terms of educational innovation?
Well, something that some things that he's already talked about that I think would be natural targets. Number one, seeing education as a continuum from early childhood, what we call preschool education, all the way through higher education, I think is a necessity.
That sounds, to my layman's ear, sort of vague and conceptual. What would that mean in concrete terms?
Well, of moving toward an entitlement to early childhood education, so everybody has a fresh and fair start in the earliest years. When we're in K-12 education, moving beyond just the charter debate, there are a lot of strategies revolving around the improvement of the quality of teaching, how we attract young teachers into the field, how we mentor them and nurture them, how we evaluate them, how we reward them for their performance. Career pathways is something the governor has talked about. I think some very promising work has happened in our administration that could be continued and expanded.
What are career pathways?
Well, connecting the world of work more concretely to the world of schooling in earlier years. We tend to reserve career decisions till very late in secondary school, if not into college. The career pathways start in middle school or in 9th grade in introducing young people to what it would take to make a career in a particular field and why subjects they're studying have relevance and meaning and, importantly, hope for students as they think about careers going forward. So you have out in Springfield an advanced manufacturing career pathway where students start taking courses in that vein early on.
Have we neglected that in part because people sort of turned up their noses at vocational education?
That's been part of it, notwithstanding the fact that our vocational schools surprisingly and quite clearly outperform our comprehensive high schools on indicators like the MCAS or attendance or graduation rates. Vocational schools are doing a lot of things right in the Commonwealth, and it's expensive to expand vocational education, but it's less expensive to bring some of the applied teaching techniques used in vocational education into our comprehensive high schools.
Briefly, Paul Reville, what do you think of Jim Pizer, Governor Baker's pick to be Secretary of Education?
I have a lot of respect for Jim Pizer. He and I have worked together and in similar roles for many, many years. We don't agree on all policy issues, but there are very few people with whom any of us agree all the time. I've known Jim to be, number one, a decent human being, number two, somebody who's thoughtful, somebody who looks at evidence, somebody who's quite capable of carrying on a high-quality discourse. He's occupied a number of positions in government, from the State Board of Ed to being the governor's advisor. He's worked with one of the premier national school reform organizations. So he brings a lot to this role. I think his focus has been on K-12, so he's now expanding into higher education and early childhood as secretary. But I think he'll do a good job, and I think he's the right person for the governor because they share a lot of perspective on this.
Paul Reville, thank you.
Thank you, Adam.